Good morning, everyone. My name is Jim Hietala. I've been with the Open Group now 11 years, and I'm responsible for our business development team, which is involved with starting new initiatives, some of the ones that Steve mentioned. I'm also our security subject matter expert, so I look after our security and risk standards and best practices in the security forum and then across some of the other activities that we have as well.
Yes.
That's okay. Yeah. Where Steve talked about the Open Group on a forum-by-forum perspective, Roberto asked me to talk about government adoption of some of our standards. So what I'll be doing is walking through standards like Togaf and Rq8 and talking about how they're used by government organizations. So it'll be kind of a standard-by-standard look at what's happening in the Open Group with a specific emphasis on where those standards are used by government organizations. So the standards that I'll be talking about, I mentioned Togaf and Rq8. I'll also touch on IT for IT, the FACE standard, SOSA, Open Fair, which is a risk analysis set of standards, and then the Open Trusted Technology Provider Standard. And I think it's an interesting common denominator about some of our popular standards that many of them were started at the request of government, or certainly in the case of Togaf and some of the others, there's been significant adoption of those standards by the government that's helped drive the use of the standards in the various industries. So I'll start with Togaf. And there'll be a lot of talk about Togaf today, so you won't hear me talk much about it. But I think in terms of adoption by government organizations, these are some of the reasons that it has been popular as a standard for doing enterprise architecture. So it's seen as a comprehensive general method that's complementary to other standards and frameworks, not competing with them. Widely adopted in the market at the user level with 90,000 some Togaf certified people, but it's also specified very frequently by governments in procurements of consulting services and so forth. It is tailorable to meet an organization and an industry's needs, available to end user organizations under a free perpetual license. It is vendor, tool, and technology neutral as an open standard, avoids reinventing the wheel, and is based on best practices. Also importantly, as a member of the Open Group, it's possible to participate in the evolution of the framework. So our architecture forum looks after Togaf and evolves it and is open to all members to make contributions to future versions of the standard. So a very large project in India is called INDIA, and it's the Indian Enterprise Architecture Framework that is based on Togaf. So it's based on Togaf, but it's tailored to India-specific requirements to realize boundaryless information flow across the nation of India. And just to get into a little bit of what's in INDIA, and there is public information available on the Indian government website on the INDIA standard, but there are 8 different reference models that have been developed within the INDIA framework, including a business reference model, performance, integration, security, architecture, governance, technology, data reference model, and application reference model. So those are the various subcomponents that they've developed based upon Togaf to comprise INDIA. And then going a little bit deeper on each one of those reference models. You can read that, the different reference models. There's a snapshot of what's in them. So in performance, it talks to the mission, goals, and measures to guide priorities, decisions, and outcomes. Security over on the left, the way information is protected and made available for all legitimate business reasons. and the various other reference models there's a short description of as well. And then just to put a little more context around it, and I won't go into this in any detail, but again, the 8 different reference models can be broken down by various capabilities that exist within those reference models. And you see on the very left, you've got a number of external impacting factors that impact NDA and the reference models within it. And on the right, you see that there are various drivers to the NDA framework. But before we got to the NDA development inside of India, which has been a very large project over a number of years, at the state level in the state of Andhra Pradesh in India, they did a state level enterprise architecture for that state called ePragati. And so they were kind of the pioneers. They were doing this before the whole of government in India got together and worked on NDA. Really with the idea to use e-governance as a tool to provide integrated services to their citizens. The ePragati initiative developed an enterprise architecture for one of the Indian states. They chose Togaf. They did various seminars and training sessions in the state of Andhra Pradesh. Wipro were the consultants who were involved in helping develop that ePragati framework. Then they had a number of other consultants that were involved in the implementation of it in the state of Andhra Pradesh. We also see that South Korea has implemented Togaf and adopted it in their internal framework. They call it the GWEA, Government-Wide Enterprise Architecture, and it brings in many of the elements of Togaf into the enterprise architecture for the government of South Korea. Bangladesh has a national enterprise architecture framework also based on Togaf. So they've been a big adopter of Togaf in the development of their government enterprise architecture. So their national EA project developed a national enterprise architecture for their government. They call it LICT, Leveraging ICT for Growth, Employment, and Governance, leveraging Togaf, and did a lot of work around implementing it with some World Bank funding inside of Bangladesh. And then just a quick survey of some other governments that we're aware of that have embraced Togaf and are using it in their enterprise architectures. So Canada, Finland, South Africa were one of the first to do a government-wide enterprise architecture using Togaf. Also the UK and Brazil, as we're aware, in the FACIN project, embracing both Togaf and Rq8 and a number of other organizations, or a number of other governments using Togaf. So to move on to the Rq8 standard, the Netherlands Tax and Customs Administration have been a big user of Rq8 and Togaf in their public service tax and customs administration. What they've created are guidelines for business, application, and infrastructure layers, standardized views on application landscape and context, and domain dashboards, a supermodel for analysis, and then a model repository for their enterprise architects. They actually published a case study, which you can find on our website. If you look for, in our library, look for that publication. It's actually a case study of how they've used Rq8 inside of their organization. Their summary of kind of what they achieved in using Rq8 was consistency across different business domains and different layers, making information available for everyone, strategic and tactical analysis to accommodate change, and as a result of that, improved quality of decisions with less lead time and lower costs. Their architecture products are more standardized. and they need less time to do baseline architecture products. So another significant user of Rq8 is the European Union, and they've had a multi-year project that they call the European Interoperability Reference Architecture at the bottom there. That flows out of an interoperability strategy at the highest level that they created, and then a European interoperability framework that they created, and then the IRA, as they call it. IRA is, if you think about the European Union coming together with 20 odd countries getting together, all of which had their own proprietary systems and approaches, the European Interoperability Reference Architecture is really an attempt to create an interoperability across all of those nations. They adopted Rq8, and specifically they used the Archie open source tool to do all of their architecture modeling. They distribute models in the Rq8 Exchange file format, and they created an addition to Rq8 that they call CarTool, which is a cartography tool that lives on top of Rq8 that is useful for not only creating the reference models, but also including some mapping functions that are critical to them. So some of the expected benefits of the EIRA, in designing, they sought to accelerate the design of systems that support the delivery of interoperable public sector services. In terms of assessing, provide a reference model for comparing existing architectures in different policy domains and thematic areas. In communicating and sharing, the goal was to provide help in documenting the interoperability elements of the complex systems and to facilitate the sharing of reusable solutions. And then they felt that it would ease discovery and reuse of interoperability solutions through the cartography component that they created. So IT for IT, Steve mentioned the forum a little bit. In terms of adoption of IT for IT, IT for IT is really a reference architecture for running the business of IT. You'll hear more about it in one of the presentations a little later today. There's a number of commercial case studies that are out there from organizations like Shell, Rabobank, and Oracle. Anecdotally, the forum believes that 30% of the Fortune 100 are currently using IT for IT or planning to implement it. With IT for IT, there is an accredited trainer program and an IT for IT people certification program with over 600 certified people from 47 countries around the world at this point. And public sector adoption, I would say, is more at the nascent early stages. But there's at least one large procurement that we're aware of in Norway, where there was a very large public sector health procurement of IT consulting services that specified IT for IT as one of the critical things needed by the consultants bidding for the project. So Steve talked about FACE. I won't talk a lot about it other than to say that if you remember the diagram that Steve showed that talked about how we start projects, develop standards using our open consensus-based process, and then on through to driving adoption. So FACE was requested by the government of the United States due to unsustainability of the development of aircraft costs. Importantly, when we get around to actually trying to drive adoption, one of the real focuses of the open group and of our members is trying to drive the use of the standards through significant procurements by large organizations, so that the standards aren't just shelfware that sit on a shelf, they're actually implemented in products and then driven through to being used and adopted by end user organizations. In the case of FACE now, we've seen very large contracts awarded where they specified the product has to conform to the FACE technical standards. So it's another evidence of the fact that when you focus on the full life cycle of a standard, including adoption, that you can have much greater success in getting the standards out there and used by customers. The Sousa Consortium, which was really it was modeled after FACE. Some of the same organizations are involved, plus others. And it's really about coming up with a standard technical architecture for the way that sensors in things like unmanned aircraft, UAVs, those sorts of things, how they communicate in a secure and open way. It's a newer consortium. It's just a couple of years old at this point. It's also growing very rapidly. The business problem that they had is that those sensor systems are increasing in the number of them, the applications, the cost and complexity. So they sought to come up with a baseline standard that would ease the interoperability issues. And again, this was driven by government seeing the need for a standard so that they weren't buying custom products at very high price tags. They could drive the cost of the technology down by getting an open marketplace for solutions. So the way that they look at their businesses, they wanted to reduce the development cost and the development cycle time, reduce the systems integration cost and risks, increase commonality and reuse, reduce sustainment and modernization costs, and some of the other benefits that you see there. In both cases, so FACE and SOSA, we had a quote from that was signed by the Army, Navy, and Air Force, listing FACE and SOSA as two of the standards that they've reviewed, and essentially putting a pretty firm commitment behind them that they determine the continued implementation of these standards and further development of a modular systems approach, open systems approach, is vital to their success. It's at the highest levels of those organizations, the Navy, Army, and Air Force, really committing to the use of open standards in their future development and procurement activities. So to talk a little bit about open fair, this is a risk analysis standard that brings quantification to the process of doing a risk analysis. The first of those standards was published now about 8 years ago, and we published a second standard maybe 4 years ago. We developed a certification program for risk analysts based upon those two standards, the Open Fair Certification Program. This standard was not driven by government. However, government is starting to get behind it. It was really driven by large financial organizations, retailers, insurance companies. It was developed by the former Chief Information Security Officer of Nationwide Insurance, which is a very large insurance company in the United States. But at this point, it's embraced by organizations like Bank of America and Walmart and others as the way to do risk analysis using quantitative methods to give businesses a more business-like summation of how much risk there is in a given risk scenario. In the federal sector, it's used by Fannie Mae, which is a large mortgage company run by the government, and other federal, state, and city government agencies. And then just 3 or 4 weeks ago now, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, who publish the NIST cybersecurity framework, listed Open Fair as one of the informative references on best practice for how you do risk analysis. So there is starting to be some government uptake of this standard in addition to all the commercial adoption that's happening. And then the Open Trusted Technology Provider Standard. So Steve mentioned this standard. I'll expand on that a little bit. This was another one that was requested by the U.S. Department of Defense. And really their issue was that they were buying custom products. They saw a shift to buying more off-the-shelf products and wanted to understand the provenance, the security characteristics of that hardware and software that they were buying. So they brought that problem to the open group. We convened a group of customer organizations as well as suppliers, so the large suppliers, people like Oracle and IBM and HP at the time, and looked at, is there a way to create a standard framework that the suppliers can adhere to and adopt, so that buyers of ICT technology were assured that the systems they were buying were secure, that there were secure engineering practices that went into building those products, that there was a life cycle approach to security for those products. So over a period of a number of years, we created the standard with a lot of industry buy-in. We developed an accreditation program for the products that the suppliers were creating. We also submitted the standard, the OTTPS standard, to ISO, so it's now published as an ISO standard as well. And we're now seeing, at the end of 6 or 7 years of hard work in this area, we've got 37 products now that are accredited. Like with some of our other standards activity, the adoption has been driven, in this case, by NASA. They have a part of their organization that manages procurement for all sorts of agencies throughout the government called SOUP. It was originally a workstation procurement program, but now it's expanded to all sorts of ICT products. And they have now recommended that vendors adopt this standard, and so we're starting to see pull-through on adoption of many of these as well. So. And that's my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions or to move on to the next speaker. Yeah, move on. Okay. Thank you.